Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave podcast. Today we have special guest Dan Abel. So Dan, welcome. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
You bet. Well, Dr. Dave, background is Coast Guard. So I retired 3 years ago after 38 years with the Coast Guard. And early years in the Coast Guard were doing fun things like driving ships and helicopters. And then as I got more senior, ended up that I was almost like the Grim Reaper. Wherever they put me, there seemed to be a major calamity that required some crisis leadership. Hurricane Sandy, Deepwater Horizon, Boston Marathon bombing. I did have some successes. We drilled for oil up in the Arctic without spilling any, which was a good thing. And then in my later years, so I had command up in Boston. That's where I encountered Hurricane Sandy and the Boston Marathon bombing. And then I had command of the Coast Guard forces out in the Alaska and the Arctic. Did a couple tours with DOD. I was Deputy Chief of Operations for Northern Command, which is the old NORAD, which now does Homeland Security, Homeland Defense with the military. And then I was the Chief of Operations for U.S. Southern Command, which is how the military works with the 31 countries of Central and South America. My final tour in the Coast Guard, I was Chief of Operations. We call it Deputy Commandant for Operations, but it's basically the Chief of Operations for the Coast Guard, which put me in a unique position because once a week I would go across the river, across the Potomac to the Pentagon, and I would sit with my peers of the other military services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and we would talk through vexing issues and is our nation prepared or how is our nation responding to worldwide pressures. And then also in the same week, I would sit with my peers within the Department of Homeland Security, which is where the Coast Guard resides. You know, we're talking TSA, FEMA, Secret Service, those folks, and talk about how are we doing with threats to the homeland. So kind of had a foot in both worlds. Finished up I was due to retire just as COVID hit, and then I was asked to interview with Secretary Azar, who was Secretary of Health and Human Services. He wanted a senior crisis leader to stand up his joint coordination cell. And so then I stayed on active duty for an extra year and was a direct report to him and worked with the White House, FEMA, and looked at how do we make sure that the federal role in COVID optimized the federal impact and minimized loss of life and sickness around the country. So a very long answer to a simple question, but so really I guess if you were to put any sort of bumper sticker on my car, it would be crisis leadership is kind of where my service in the Coast Guard took me.
Nice. Well, I'd have to argue with you just a bit because you're like, well, that's a long answer to a short question. Well, when you had a 38-year career, that really wasn't a long answer. I just had to be honest with you. For whatever that's worth. Yeah. So, no, I'm sure we'll get into some of those experiences a little bit later. Like I said, now I will pick on you a little bit. You were talking about where I went. It was a crisis or some issue or whatever. Well, it was the crisis or the issue or the calamity. I'm assuming before you got there or after you got there.
Well, it's interesting as my first major field command was in Boston. So I had from New Jersey to Canada out to 2,000 miles. Anything that hit the nation, boats sinking, oil spills, any of that stuff, ships hitting bridges, which actually happened. Yeah, I know.
You boys have been busy here the last 24 hours, man.
And it was interesting, Dave, because they send us to a 2-week school at Harvard, and this is the finishing school. It's the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, and this is Chief of Emergency Management for states. This is, Target will send the emergency manager there. Walmart will send the emergency. I mean, these are the folks that are going to make things happen when it's a really bad day for the nation. And they said, the old look left, look right. One of you in the next 6 months is going to have a major disaster that you're going to have to respond to. And I'm thinking it sucks for these other guys because, the Northeast, we never get hit with a hurricane. Come on. What could happen? And then Hurricane Sandy hits and 14 feet of water come over Manhattan. And guess what? 6 months later, I was the guy. And then I came back, and on the second time we met as a cadre, I was doing the class on how I applied what we had learned 6 months before to that particular thing. So I don't know that it followed me, but I hate to say it, but any part of the country, if you're in a leadership role for 2 years, chances are good that you're going to be confronted with something that's going to require some very quick decision making, some strong leadership, some sense making and decision making and meaning making. All the things are a little bit different when leadership gets pressurized by a crisis.
Understandably so, and like I said, nobody's expected it, especially if we're talking about the at the time of the recording, shortly after the Francis Scott Key Bridge just got hit by a container, a Singapore flagged container cargo ship and collapsed. Like I said, it's been just even the decision to switch from search and rescue to search and recovery is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those where throughout the phases and how do you brief the next of kin, and it's interesting, the Coast Guard, the decision maker that decides to suspend a search, which we never close a search for somebody, we suspend pending further information. But right. You get to a certain point where water temperatures, all those things, the probability of detection for how many times you search the water, the fact you've adjusted it for drift and current, and the whole time you're telling the families, you're telling them what you're doing, how you're doing it. But the decision maker that says we're going to suspend the search is also the same one that briefs the family. So it's an interesting dynamic there that you've got to be able to look in the eye of a grieving spouse, a mother, a father, a brother, sister, or aunt, uncle, and say, this is what the Coast Guard's done, and I'm telling you that the chances of survival are not worth the risk of putting more Coast Guard lives out there. And if you do it right, generally the family is thankful, appreciative, and amazed you're still looking because you briefed them that, after about 12 hours, the water temperature is such that, the chance of being alive without a survival suit or not being in a life raft or whatever is almost near impossible. And that's why 48 or 36 hours later, they're going to say, why are you still searching? Didn't you tell me that the probability is so small? So this is how you walk a family through the stages of when you go from rescue to recovery. So it should make logic to them that I understand what you're doing. I may not like it, but usually it's appreciative of what the Coast Guard did.
No, absolutely. So it's definitely suspending a search. I say would definitely be hard. It's good to have to know that the person who's going to be suspending the search is the one that's going to have to be looking eye to eye to that person. Yeah. I mean, to a very way smaller extent, even searching a fireground for victims. And at some point, like I said, is the chances of somebody being there, like I said, once you kind of explain to us, slim and none based on these criteria. Like I said, at least most people are easy enough that they understand, and given a proper explanation, they kind of get an idea of, okay, well, I understand what you're going through. I understand the criteria. And yeah, you're right. Like I said, it's almost surprised that you put that much into it, 45-degree water, and you've been there for, 12 hours. It's like nobody's going to survive that for that long without something like that. So no, it definitely makes sense. But like I said, you've had a lot of experience when it comes to crisis leadership, and I definitely want to hit on that a whole lot more later, especially with what you're doing now. But with that, I did want to get into kind of our first structured question is, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Well, if you go, I'm telling the doctor who's got his Ph.D. in leadership, at the most basic level, it's getting someone else to do what you want them to do, and good leaders do it because they want to do it for you, not because you're mandating it. And I know we've had discussions of, what it's not, and probably the best alter ego is manager versus leader. If the leader is going to speak to the heart, Simon Sinek is big on the why. The leader's going to talk to the why. This is why we're doing what we're doing. The manager will get us from A to B with, how much fuel is it going to take? What course are we going to do? Do we need food on board the ship? But you need somebody on the bridge saying, this is where we're going. This is why we're going there. I need you to be on this journey with me. And then folks, they will do anything if you've spoken to the heart of those that are coming on that journey with you. So even though it sounds very coercive or self-serving to say, I'm making you do something I want you to do, at the end of the day, that's what leadership is. It's just, it feels a lot different when you're in the midst of a powerful, influential leader that is able to bring you on this journey instead of saying you're not going to get paid unless you do it. And we've talked about Maxwell's levels, and you certainly don't want to be the bottom level, which is you come to work because I pay you, and if you don't come to work, I don't pay you. That's a leader, but not an inspirational leader, that's for sure.
No, just that first rung, since you talked about Maxwell's levels of leadership, that first rung of just positional power, like I said, it's, matter of fact, I had that discussion with a client today that's using some of our assessment tools in a conflict resolution, and this person who's a department head doesn't quite understand that, yes, I don't think he ever took that buddy to boss course, really, because he's still trying to be the buddy, and he's not realizing that, hey, not everybody goes down that road. Like when you're in your department head level, at some point, what you say is not an idea, not a suggestion, it's an order. And so same thing, you as an admiral, like you might just throw out something as an idea. Well, a junior enlisted person is not going to take that as just an idea. They're going to take that as the admiral ordered, and it's going to get done. So he never understood that, hey, he has that positional power has never really registered with him that, wait a minute, I can stand in between this guy and his paycheck. That puts it, it's not just, okay, we're drinking buddies, we have fun at work, or whatever. At some point, like, that puts it at a different level that, I get, you get, whatever. But then some people just, they look at that level and they're like, I don't take that as you're joking. I take that as you're criticizing, or I take that as you don't think I'm doing my work right. Or, so it just comes from a completely different point of view versus colleagues versus, horizontal. But that first level positional power, just standing in between somebody and their paycheck, fine, everybody starts there, but that's not the place you want to end up, especially if you're trying to lead a larger organization.
Yeah, now I may take exception to one thing you said, that the junior enlisted has to understand that this is a command. I would hope as a leader, if I explain what we're trying to do, that the junior enlisted certainly is empowered to say, hey, I'm closest to the H-65 engine, or as the guy in the back that does a lot of hoisting, I think this is the best way to get what we want to do. And so you certainly use their expertise because their perspective is much better. Quick story. So I'm in command on Cape Cod, and I've got all the Coast Guard aviation response from New Jersey to Canada that's based out of Cape Cod, fixed wing and rotary wing. And there's a hurricane that is coming straight for Cape Cod. And we have to decide, are we going to send our helicopters south into New Jersey to hunker down, and then the minute the storm's over, we'll pull them out of the hangar? Or do I send them north up to New Hampshire, Vermont, and hope that the storm goes south? And we're looking at the forecast, we're deciding this decision, and a very junior lieutenant that was sitting in the conference room said, "Hey Skipper, why do all 4 helicopters have to go to the same place? What if we send 2 south and 2 north?" And that way we know for sure we'll always have 2 helicopters in the right place when the storm's over. And he understood the goal was to be the first ones on scene when the winds will allow us to get airborne. But he had a different perspective. And all of us were stuck in this paradigm of, well, all 4 of them are going to fly in one place, and we're going to put all our chips on that, and we hope it works out. And good on that person, again, get to the why, which is what are we trying to do here? We want to make sure we're ready to respond. And the lieutenant had a much more smarter way than I did. That's for sure.
Well, one thing I think is it's not as much of you intend it as a thing, is that sometimes, like I said, a suggestion from an admiral or a suggestion from a general or an upper, it's not that you're coming across as it's an order. It's almost like, but you're thinking, hey, this is a suggestion on a way to do it. And they're taking it as, oh, well, Admiral said or General said, what I mean? So it's not that you're intending it as or coming across as or you're putting it out as. Yeah. You're meaning it as a, just a goodwill suggestion, and they're taking it as, well, if they said it, then, I'm going to do it regardless of, they're taking it as an order, even though you're not meaning it as an order. And you're absolutely right. From a lean process improvement standpoint, the person turning the wrench on the helicopter knows a whole lot more about what needs to be done to make that process a lot more smooth than the person who's 17 levels up.
Yep.
That's for sure.
You know, another quick story there. So when I was early as an aviator, I'm a new aircraft commander, and candidly, as a lieutenant, JG, or lieutenant, I have less time flying the helicopter than many of the enlisted folks in the back that are maybe senior enlisted or chiefs. They've got years and years and years of flying, and this young buck in the front, is 2 years out of flight school, and they just made him aircraft commander. Somebody once gave me the technique. They said, okay, if something's weird in the airplane, somebody says that vibration doesn't feel right, or the sound, or hey, did we clip that tree, or are you guys comfortable with that kind of stuff? They said, as the aircraft commander, never start with your opinion. Start with the most junior person in the helicopter, and that may be the rescue swimmer, to say, hey, Joe, what do you think? And Joe then has a clean slate to render an opinion, to say, this is the first time I've ever felt this vibration in the back of the helicopter. I think the safest thing is probably to land and let's check it out. And then you work your way forward. Two reasons. Number one, then as the one who has 51% of the vote, you've heard everybody's uninfluenced decision. Also, you've heard their position. And then the last thing is you're not influencing them. Because if the person with 51% of the vote says, yeah, I don't feel that vibration, I don't think we ought to turn around, what do you think everybody else is going to do? They're going to go, well, guess we're not turning around. So
that's exactly my point. Exactly. Yeah. And I like how you put it, that you put the junior person first. So that way you don't have, hey, chief, what do you think? Or hey, senior chief, what do you think? And then all of a sudden, okay, hey, yeah. What do you think? Oh, so he's going to go with what the senior chief said, right? So going from the most junior up, but what you just said is exactly what I was talking about. If you give your suggestion first, as let's say the one with the 51% of the vote, everyone's going to go with that same way because they don't want to buck against it.
Yep. No, you got it exactly.
Yeah, I think Marshall Goldsmith talked about that when he was doing some work with the Navy, and it was the same thing. They were doing some aviation stuff that was kind of hey, I don't want the money, but I'd love to be able to go flying or whatever, and some of the senior admirals were saying the exact same thing, that I don't make the suggestion, I'm not the first one to make the suggestion, because they don't take it as a suggestion, they take it as an order.
Yep. No, you got it.
No, that's exactly it. So we will be back. We're going to have our first break, and we'll be back momentarily for our next section of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave right after this. All right, we are back with our second segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, here with Dan Abel. So Dan, we just talked about what leadership means to you and what does good leadership look like. Let's start this next segment with another question. Look at, what is one of the biggest leadership challenges that you've had to face in your career?
I'm gonna probably say Hurricane Sandy, for a number of reasons. Number one, 14 feet of water went across northern New Jersey, Staten Island, Manhattan. It was a mess. It's a part of the country that does not handle those types of things very often. I mean, you take Florida or Texas, every other year their emergency management's not doing a practice or doing a real live, response.
Right.
So there was a lot there. A couple other things were pressurizing that particular thing. It was the first major incident since Katrina, and the thinking was, well, in Katrina, Admiral Allen, the Coast Guard 3-star, was in charge. Therefore, the Coast Guard admirals must be the ones that are in charge when we have a big disaster. So you throw Dan Abel, who's a 1-star, fairly junior 1-star, into New York City, and people instantly were looking at me saying, well, okay, you're the lead federal agency, what are we doing here? And you're like, hang on a second here, I'm not the lead federal agency. So that was happening. At the same time, a week after the hurricane hit was a presidential election. It was President Obama's ultimate re-election, and the narrative was that this was Obama's Katrina. New York City was still back on its heels. The federal government has failed, so there was a lot of pressure with an election, as you would expect. And then the last thing, if you know anything about the way it's supposed to work, is the mayor calls the governor and says, I need some help. The governor calls other mayors to see if there's help for that mayor. Then the governor calls other governors to see if there's help. Then if that doesn't work, they call the president. President declares an emergency. FEMA opens up the federal authorities as well as the money, and then the military rolls in. If you think the mayor of New York is going to call the governor of New York and say that I don't got this and I need help, you don't understand the dynamics within the state of New York and the city. I mean, it is Gotham City. And so what was happening is all the FEMA folks were sitting in Albany saying there's no unmet requirements from the city of New York City. And they were right, because the mayor was not asking for anything. So all of these things were pressurized in all of this stuff. And then the last thing is, the Port of New York and New Jersey, 1,400 vessel movements a day. Okay. 300, there's 150 federally regulated port facilities in that port. The millions and millions of dollars of industry that flows in and out of that port. So when the port got hit, of course the question is, when can we get the port reopened? Well, there's a lot that happens to reopen a port. So anyway, all that pressurized together, and I showed up, and then the last thing I will say, which was ultimately a huge challenge, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, is the first responders are the first victims. God bless my coasties. They sent their families somewhere to Pennsylvania. Many of them didn't even know where their families were, because every night they were moving to a different hotel because there was an exodus of people out of New York City to include their families. And these were folks that they were sleeping in a Coast Guard station that had just been flooded out 2 days before. They wanted to get their boats back in the water. They're still doing search and rescue. They haven't slept in 3-4 days. At many of our stations along Long Island and Sandy Hook and all that, the housing is adjacent to the station. So they can look over the fence line and see their family house, which is government quarters, totally flooded. The kids' toys are destroyed. The family photo albums from Grandma and Grandpa are floating around, in the house. This is a world they're living in, and all they want to do is serve their country, and they're not ready to say no to an admiral who shows up and says, how you guys doing? So there was a down and in responsibility for me to get these guys relieved, to get some reserves in, to bring some people from the Midwest that time of year weren't doing much, no offense to the Midwest, but bring some capacity in to let them go, get their lives back together. So there was a down and in responsibility within the Coast Guard and up and out, which was to get the city of New York and the state of New York back to run. So a lot were going on in that particular instance.
It sounds like it. I mean, Sandy was just a mess in all sorts of different ways. That's for sure. And like I said, it's you're right. You're talking about the 14 feet of water, the storm surge over Manhattan. It reminds me sort of like, all right, I was in South Carolina or Georgia when we had, near the coast, when we ended up having a, 6 feet of snow with 12-foot drifts. I mean, it's sort of like that never gets that type of thing. That all of a sudden now it's like you couldn't buy a snow shovel or a snow blower at the Home Depot if you had to, right? If your life depended on it, kind of thing. It's the same type of thing. You're on the coast. You're in coastal North Carolina. Like I said, you're in Florida. Okay, whoop-de-doo, right? It's old hat, right? It's just you're good to go. But but those guys never getting that type of thing, I can imagine. And I imagine, no offense to the guys in the Midwest. I mean, typically hurricane season is not a busy time for for folks in Iowa. I'll just be honest,
Bring them in. Yep.
Just throwing that out there. But no, I can imagine that being. And whether there's anything in particular, I mean, like you said, you got your up and out, you got your down and in, and kudos on trying to get relief in there. Because, like I said, if they're all looking over that fence and seeing their house flooded, I mean, it's hard to. They're not going to say no, but it's hard to concentrate fully on. I need to be doing my job. When you're like, oh my God, but everything I have over there is ruined. Where somebody coming in from, like I said, the South, the Midwest, somewhere where they're not affected. Wow, that sucks. But wow, that sucks is a whole lot different than that's my house. And oh my God, is my, totally different. So kudos on trying to get those guys relieved. So what else about that? I mean, that's look, plenty of challenges there. But I mean, anything else specifically about that that was just you thought was just kind of an exceptional challenge in regards to Sandy?
Well, again, it was the expectation that the Coast Guard was going to do everything because, well, Thad Allen did everything down in New Orleans, so fix us. It's interesting.
Wave the magic wand, Dan. Wave the magic wand.
As we're probably going to talk about the fact that I am teaching crisis leadership, and when I did, it was interesting. I took kind of the list of phase zero, normal steady state leaders, what we expected of them. Things like empowerment, trust, communications, vision, self-confidence, those kind of things. And then I arrayed those against what some of the scholarly works of crisis leader practices, traits, things like that. And it was interesting that there's a couple that come right across. One of them is communication. Phase zero, you're the new leader at Apple or Microsoft or whatever. You got to communicate, communicate, communicate. If you're thrown into a crisis, you got to communicate, communicate, communicate. It's interesting. It rises to the top of both those lists of normal, steady state to crisis. And one of the things I did was, communicate, like I said, up and out and down and in, so everyone knew what the priorities were. The other one too, which is interesting. Phase zero steady state is some sort of vision. Reading the environment. Where's the organization going? And in crisis, that's called sense making or meaning making, which is figuring out what just happened, what needs to happen next, and how can we get there. It's similar type of skills. And my experience on that second one in crisis is if you can refine 3 or 4 things that you are going to do, then you can tell your overseers within the federal government and Congress, this is what the Coast Guard is going to be doing for you, and you can tell your own folks, this is what our mission is. Admiral Allen was great at this. Deepwater Horizon. We're going to plug the hole. We're going to collect the oil that made it out of the hole. We're going to protect the beach, and if it hits the beach, we're going to clean our beach. Those are the 4 things your Coast Guard's doing. I mean, if you can clearly define that. So when I got there, it was interesting. So people are like, well, the Coast Guard's in charge of everything. I'm like, no, let me tell you the things that we are in charge of. Number one is we're in charge of providing Coast Guard missions. And my first line of effort was we're going to fight through. We're going to get the boats back in the water. We're going to get crews to drive those boats, and we're going to get back to saving lives and protecting the New York. We're going to get the buoys back in the water. So the port, we're going to get back to being coasties. The second one is we're going to reopen the port. Now, eventually I found out that that's great that I can give you clean water all the way to the pier, but if the shore facility has no employees, electricity, the employees can't get to work, it doesn't do you any good, but it ain't a federal problem at that point. That's a private problem. The next thing is identify and prioritize our needs within the Coast Guard. I had an organization of 42,000 coasties looking at me saying, hey, Dan, what do you need? How can I get it to you? And I started ticking it off. A lot of this was getting my senior enlisted, on the road. Find out whose families don't have any place to live. Start calling back to headquarters. Let's get some contract hotels in Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey. Let's find out what stations need their boats back in the water. Let's get the cranes down there, get the boats going. The fourth one was take care of our people. Again, coasties, they're going to run to their heart burst. So many of these guys are like, just put the boat in the water, sir. I want to get underway. I'm like, no. You've been through a lot in the last 96 hours. I think you need to probably be relieved. And there's a lot of bosun mates that know how to drive that kind of boat. Let's find one of those. And then the last one was to partner and execute the mission and demonstrate our commitment. This was, candidly, that was directed by the Commandant that said, I'm not seeing a lot of Coast Guard in the response. So that was, okay, then I'm going to show up at press conferences. I'm going to make it clear that Coast Guard's part of the team, whether it's local, state, federal, FEMA, military, because we're kind of this, we're a chameleon. We're military when we want to be military. We're civilian when we want to be civilian. We're first responders when that's convenient. We talk bro talk with fire, police, EMS because we're first responders, and yet we could do bro talk with an Army, Navy, Air Force because we're military as well. But when I explain to folks, those are what we're doing. We're going to fight through and provide, Coast Guard missions. We're going to open the port. We're going to take care of our people, and we're going to demonstrate we're committed to the citizens of New York. That's all we're doing. So when people said, who's going to dewater the old folks home, in Sandy Hook, I'm like, you need to talk to the state emergency managers, because that's not a federal Coast Guard role, nor should it be. We'll help, but because you can't become all of everything, because mission creep will kill you. So
No, you try to be all things to all people. It's just not going to work. It's like, look, we don't have a fleet of fire engines that we can draft out of here. And like I said, talk to the fire chief about dewatering it possibly. Like I said, that's not what we're trying to do. Exactly. So I can appreciate the clear defined mission. And it's funny, one of the things you said is that those guys have been through that much. And for some reason, and I can relate from being in the fire department for years, like I said, it was cool because we did have a Coast Guard base there in Portsmouth. So, I mean, yeah, we train with them all the time. And, yeah, I could get the kind of like the bro talk you're talking about with fire and police. So, I say it was a lot of fun. It was great being there for their family days and training with them and stuff like that. But it's interesting because I can completely relate and understand to where, like, I need to get my mind off of all the stuff that's going on around me, and you almost feel like I can get my mind off of this, just get me back to work where I can focus and I'm good at what I'm doing and that's my job, right? The problem is you don't realize the amount of stress that you're seeing it at a bigger angle, a bigger view that they're not. Like I want to get my mind off of this, and I can easily do that by going back to work and focusing on that to be able to push everything out. When you're like, no, if you deal with that first, then come back with a clear head and you'll be fine. Make sure the family's safe, make sure the dog's good, make sure everything's cool. Then we can put you back in the rotation. I know you want to go back in the rotation, but not yet.
Right? Yeah, people are grasping for a sense of normal. When we were able to get the American flag up the flagpole at one of the stations, there was this huge cheer, because guess what? That means we're back in business. And Dave, it's interesting. I'm walking around, and the gear locker, because now it was cold. I mean, it snowed 2 days after Sandy, so they all their survival suits got flooded. So they're basically drying them up on a clothesline in front of the station. And I talked to one of the bosun mates. Bosun mates are known for being crusty. I mean, they're kind of like the Popeyes of the sea, And I said, "Boats, how's it going?" And of course, what's he going to tell him? "I'm doing good, Admiral." I'm like, "No, really, seriously, how you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm kind of worried about my daughter." I said, "Okay, tell me about your daughter." He said, "Well, she was born 6 months ago. She's real tiny." I said, "Where is she?" And he said, I don't know. He said, "My wife, the dog, and the baby left the night before the storm. Every day at 10 o'clock, they check out of the hotel that they're in because they can't get more than one night at a time. They put everything in the car and they wait until 4 o'clock that afternoon when they can find another hotel. Then they move in for that night, and next day at 10 o'clock, the cycle starts again." And he's got tears rolling down his eyes. And he said, "I just want to get back on the boat, and I want to back driving boats." And number one, I got the chaplain over there and said, "Hey, I think you need to talk to the boats." And second of all, I talked to the commander of the base, and I said, I think boats need to spend some time with his family. I know what he wants, but I know what he needs. And we need to get a boatswain mate out here that knows how to drive a 47, and let's give him some time away, because his need for normalcy is going to drive him to deeper and deeper into the Coast Guard mission, because he can control that. That other stuff he cannot control. And that's where we owe it to our that's why the down and in crisis is so critical. I mean, you've got to take care of your people, because the nice part about being an inspirational leader is they'll run until their heart bursts to support you. The bad news is they'll run until their heart bursts to support you, and you've got to get them to back off a little bit. You're a human too, so.
And at the time, during the incident, that's not what they want to hear. Because like I said, it's normalcy and it's something they can control. Yes. Where with everything is completely, a Charlie Fox, right? They can't control anything. It's like, okay, just that sense of normalcy. If I can control this because I know what I'm doing, this is my job, this is what I'm really good at. Well put, it's what I can control. And that gives me a sense of purpose and feeling of, okay, things are going to be okay beyond the stuff that I can't control.
Yeah.
And you're right. So like I said, to get them relieved is absolutely the best thing they could do, but not what they want at the time. But looking back at it, I'm sure they'll say that's the best thing that could have happened.
Nobody can self-diagnose stress or fatigue. Everybody will tell you, "I'm doing fine, I'm doing fine, I'm doing fine." Until you give them a break, and then they're going to go, "Geez, I was totally wrung out, man. I was more strung out than I thought. I didn't realize how exhausted I was because
Yep.
nobody wants to be the one that's, throttling back in the middle of crisis.
No, and nobody wants to be the one that taps out of the match. All right, well, I give up. I'm not going to do it. I can't keep up. Everybody else is going. Everybody else is going strong, but I'm going to be the one that wusses out and says, no, I need some me time. I need to go home. No, that's just not kind of the culture, right? Of let me pull out my card and say, hey, it's too hot outside. It's too wet. It's too cold. You know what I mean? Yeah, I can't see that in the Coast Guard, especially after what you guys do in Alaska. I mean, it's like, it's too cold, it's too wet, it's too what? Like, no, that's not what we do. That's we run into that kind of stuff. It's kind of like the bad weather and the fire, right? Some people run away from it, some people run into it. So I can relate to running into the fire versus running into the bad weather. To kind of do what you need to do.
We had a commandant that once said it's the curse of can do, Back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the Coast Guard motto was you have to go out, but you don't have to come back, which is a horrible motto. I mean, yes, it's inspiring, but it makes it sound like you are more disposable than the folks you're going to save. The reason you're going offshore in horrible conditions is to get those people back to their family. Your family deserves to have you back as well. There's an organizational struggle. We want adrenaline junkies in the Coast Guard. You want folks that are going to go fly or get their boat underway in a hurricane. But you don't want folks to take unnecessary risk. You want them to manage the risk, understand the risk, and understand when the risks have changed sufficiently. You go, you know what? This isn't what we signed up for when we got underway half an hour ago. We're turning back, and we'll save them another way, but it ain't going to be my day to do it.
No.
So, I mean, it's a struggle because, again, you want the adrenaline junkie, but you want a well-informed risk decision maker.
Well, and the thing is, the equipment, the training, everything that goes into making you who you are mitigates that risk to a certain degree. I used to say, and it's not quite this simple, but almost every job is simple if you have the right tools and the right training, right? Compared to, hey, I don't want to climb up a 200-foot electrical tower and dealing with like 50,000. I mean, no, not me. But those guys do it every day because they're like, it's no big deal. I've got the tools, I've got the training. It's it's old hat to them. Same kind of thing. It's that mitigates the risk of them going out into the storm. But like I said, the unnecessary risk of like we're not going to do something stupid. It's no different than Hurricane Isabel. I mean, at some degree, the fire department is like, okay, at this wind level, like we're not going out. Like at this wind level, it's only cardiac arrest, like absolute life-threatening emergencies, and at this particular wind level, like there's nothing we can do for you. It's just physically not safe to go out there. It's just not. And so I completely get that. So that wraps up our second segment, and we have a few more questions to get to. So we will get to those when we come back for segment 3 of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. All right, we are back with our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave with special guest Dan Abel. So one of the questions that we weren't able to get to for the last segment is, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Ooh, geez. Are you talking crisis leaders? Are you talking normal steady state leaders?
You pick.
Number one is, I would say, being overwhelmed with inputs versus data to create wisdom. I don't know that leaders have ever been bombarded as much as they are nowadays. Between social media, 7x24 news cycles, emails and texts from your boss, things coming directly from the field because maybe the bosun mate actually has your email address and he thinks the admiral needs to know this. You are just waiting in inputs, and you're starving for information and knowledge. And how you rise above the murmurs and that kind of stuff. And the last one I would say is bringing clarity through well-articulated lines of effort or objectives or something like that. If you can't articulate the 3 or 4 things you're doing, then perhaps you're not the right leader for that. Because if you can in your own mind decide the 3 or 4 things that are important to the organization and communicate that up and out and down and in, then shame on you. Because you need to bring that clarity. Whether we're going to release a new product, and these are the three things this product is going to do, or we're going to respond to emergency, and these are the four things we're going to do. Because candidly, particularly within the emergency or crisis leader thing, once you decide what your lines of effort are, then you can put metrics against them. You can explain them to the local officials, and just like suspending a search, it makes sense to the mayor when the Coast Guard says, we're standing down our crisis response because I told you the four things we're going to do. Did it. We're going to go back to normal, which is you got a captain that runs the Port of New York, and the captain will continue to run the Port of New York. I'll be in Boston if you need me, and good luck and God bless. Because no one wants to take their hands off of that emergency organization that has stood up, because it feels good. I mean, you got us out of crisis, and we really like it, and we like having all this presence here, and the cops like it, and the police like it. So again, going through the wades and piles and piles and piles of all the inputs you get, and then being able to articulate, these are the three or four things that are important to us. Let's move out.
Well, that's one thing I really like about the incident command system and ICS is that, okay, it gets implemented for a crisis and everybody kind of knows, because it's a standardized format, where my role is in that, who's the incident commander or co-incident commander or whatever, and then kind of down from there. But then when it's time to de-escalate, okay, well, now we can take this branch out, we can take that branch out, we can take this branch out. So exactly, expand it and then be able to shrink it back down. So, and I think a lot of the folks, what's one of the best things I think about the last 15, 20 years is really being able to get a lot of the ICS classes out. The national that FEMA's been able to do is get that out to a huge, broad population. And there's a lot of the states, I believe, Commonwealth of Virginia was the same way, that a lot of their all their emergency responders had to be trained at a basic level of that. And then as you rise up in the organization, the higher you sort of mid-levels, and then your chief officer levels and stuff like that, to where you get a bigger, broader scope, see a bigger, wider picture of all that. But I think that does help. And even the mayor's office ends up having some degree of, okay, I'm familiar with ICS, but yes, you're right. It's being able to articulate those four and be able to back down when all of a sudden, hey, we've done those four, now we're going to be in the process of de-escalating that. But what do you think? Do you honestly think in the business world that a lot of leaders and managers have that level of clarity that you're talking about?
Well, I guess I would say shame on them for not.
Okay.
And maybe I'm getting back to the Simon Sinek type thing of, the why. But if you can't articulate why you're in business and what value you add to the customer, shame on you. I mean, we sell X. That's not compelling. We make life better for a teacher because we produce this product the teachers can use to better reach their children. That seems like what a leader would say.
Yeah.
We sell X doesn't inspire, and so I think the leader's role is to pull the organization up to what inspires, what speaks to the heart, because just because you're a different company that makes something different, that's not unique. But everybody wants to be part of something special and be part of a special team,
right? And
be a special role in the special team. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there. Everybody wants to be part of a special team, but they want to be the best player on the team. So I would say that even in the corporate world, if you can't, do the elevator speech, which is, why do we exist? If you can't come up with something pithy that speaks to the heart and is genuine, it cannot be something that your public affairs team came up with that sounds so cutesy and, tiny ponies and rainbows and My Little Pony and everything works well. No, it's got to be, this is why we exist, because I want to change the world. I want to help people, that kind of thing.
Well, I got to feel you were talking about leaders versus managers. And like I said, we've had this before where, management is more of I look at it more of a skill set. But you're right, as far as the good leader, poor leader type of thing, obviously we use the verbiage of leader manager all the time. It's just kind of part of the lexicon now, versus management being a skill set. But that squirrel moment being aside, I got a feeling that you wouldn't have the parodies of leadership, right? You wouldn't have the office, you wouldn't have Dilbert, you wouldn't have all these different things that kind of make fun of the bad boss if if every leader, quote unquote, or person in a leadership position or management position was able to clearly articulate, these are the three things we do. This is why we exist. This is why I got a feeling that's probably a lot more of a rare gem in business and industry than it should be. And you're right. I agree. Shame on them for not, but how many folks, I wonder, going through, I'm the best salesman, so I got promoted to the sales manager, right? And for some reason, everybody didn't quit, so I got, director of sales now. At some point, as we're trudging through the Peter principle, right? Putting everybody to their highest level of incompetence. It's like, wow, now it promoted me to where I really don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I can't let on. I wonder, I got a feeling that there's that level of clarity would be exceptionally useful to organizations if they did have every single leader down the line, from the CEO all the way to the frontline supervisor, be able to distill, here's my part of the organization and what we do for what I'm responsible for, to those 3 to 4 salient points. I can imagine that being huge.
Yeah, and I'm not so naive to think that, if you're a line level supervisor, an assembly line, that you're going to inspire people, get on the soapbox and beat your chest. But if you can say, why we make this widget is so important, because we give this to the next factory, this is going to become part of a car in 6 weeks that somebody's going to buy, and we need to get it right. Yep. Because families are going to depend on it. I mean, that's how you take it from the widget level to something bigger, because I make widgets. Yeah. Boy, that's level 0. Right. I will come to work and I will make them until 1 second after the bell hits, and then I'm punching out and I'm going home. So,
Yep. No, I get it. Because like I said, if you could say, hey, if we screw up on this piece goes into that piece goes into that, and if this fails, you could have, a whole family, lose their life, or multiple families lose their life in a car accident because this component failed. I mean, do you honestly think that, and think about the consequences, but do you think the guy that was at the O-ring manufacturer was like, if we don't get this right, the space shuttle is going to blow up on national television?
Yeah.
Bad
well,
I mean,
really digging into
that is talking about that O-ring. He wasn't saying, if we don't get this right, probably, I don't know for sure, but I mean, if you break it down to a level of something that everybody remembers and knows about, that's a perfect analogy to say this widget. All right, I work at an O-ring factory. Whoop-de-doo. Well, that was a big whoop-de-doo. That was a huge whoop-de-doo, right? So I absolutely get it that even at the widget level, how important that can be.
Yep. I mean, I'm just trying to, anywhere, Coast Guard Air Station, growing, I mean, if you misplace the socket, every helicopter and airplane on this air station is going to land as soon as possible until we find that socket, because we do tool control to make sure that we don't kill anybody by being lackadaisical or complacent on the hangar deck or on the ramp. I mean, those types of, that's the world I was raised in aviation, which is, it's a world of excellence. And you got to earn your right to be on the hangar deck or to fly in the back of the helicopter, and you got to earn that every single day that you come to work, because we're the best aviation organization in the military for a reason, and you're part of it.
Well, most people outside of that wouldn't think, okay, so you lost a ratchet, so what? Well, if it's sitting on top of an engine or sitting on top of something, and then all of a sudden that thing flies out, hit somebody and kill them. I mean, there's so much, something on the hangar deck or whatever, so they're blown off at incredible speed and end up injuring or killing somebody. There's so many ways that you could not come home at the end of the shift. And that was the one thing in the fire department is the biggest thing is, okay, number one goal is everybody goes home tomorrow morning.
Yep. Get the crew home from every mission every time. That was always my first thing of our vision. But it was interesting, So I was flying jets out of Cape Cod, and
you
we do a thing called hot gas.
Huh? I thought you hated
we do a thing called hot gassing, where we come in, we leave the one engine running, you plug in the hose from the fuel truck, and you gas it while the engine's running, so that you don't need to shut down and then do a through flight. And it's an efficiency thing.
Right.
It allows you to get two bags of gas, worth of flight. And we get back in. We're sitting at the hold short, which is we've already told tower ready to go, ready to turn and take off. And one of the flight mechs said, "Sir, I'm missing one of my gloves." And I'm like, okay, he was just out doing it. And we teach them, when you're handling the fuel gear, don't wear your flight gloves, because then if you get fuel spilled on your flight gloves and we have a fire in flight, you don't want fuel soaked gloves.
Correct.
I said, what do you typically do with your gloves? He said, well, I set them right on the engine inlets, on the engine that's turned off, and then I put on the other gloves for fuel handling. I said, so you're missing your glove. Uh-huh. Everyone looked and we realized, I bet I know where the glove is. I bet when we started that engine up, it got sucked right into a very expensive engine. And we had no indications of any problem. So taxi back in. Of course, he feels horrible. The chief gets the borescope out and he's running the little lens thing between all the turbine blades. He sees a little piece of leather, some green Nomex, and he realizes that glove made it through a lot of Ginzu before it finally got chopped up, and we ended up having to replace the engine. But it's interesting, as much as you wanted to just kill that flight mech for leaving his glove there, the fact that he felt comfortable to say, I know I'm in deep crap if what I think happened, but I'm in deeper crap if I don't say something. And that is where you go, you know what? Good on you, dude. We're all humans. We make mistakes. And the minute you realize that, hey, maybe there was a risk here and maybe I did something horrible, raise your hand. Same with if you're the one that lost the socket at the end of the shift, man, you got to feel comfortable. The organization's not going to crush you. They're not going to be happy, but they're going to applaud the fact that you're watching a greater good.
Yep. And I wonder, outside of the aviation industry, where it's just baked into cake and it truly is part of the culture, civilian, military, Coast Guard, whatever. Outside of that aviation culture, you wonder how many organizations truly build that psychological safety, bake it into the cake to where people do feel like, wow, I can tell you I made a mistake. Like, I can't find my glove. I normally leave it here. It probably got sucked in. Yeah, it feels like crap. But you're thinking, all right, well, like I said, better than getting up in the air, lose an engine, and end up potentially crashing. But I wonder how many, like I said, they're not happy about it. But you wonder how many places really build in that level of, it's okay to tell, we applaud you for telling us. It led to this would have led to a much bigger problem if you hadn't have told us. Same kind of thing. But I would bet a lot of places, a lot of people in a lot of organizations would never feel comfortable on owning up to that. They would pass the buck. I don't know what happened. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. I'll get a new set when I get there. They'll never know.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was talking the traits of a leader in steady state or phase zero, trust is one of them. That people trust you. It's interesting. So in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, it looked like we were going to end up, and they ended up rationing fuel in New York City, which right before the election they did not want to have happen. There's a lot of fuel that goes through the port of New York, New Jersey. There's 2 pipelines that go through New York, New Jersey. There's a lot that's refined there. And when I opened the port, I was at a press conference with with Governor Cuomo, and I said there's 2 million gallons of fuel sitting in barges in the port of New York, and the port of New York is now open. Well, guess what? The next press conference was, hey, Admiral, how many gallons of fuel now are in the port of New York? Because that became the metric du jour, because Abel was dumb enough to say something about that. Well, where I'm going here is there was a commander, and her job is, she was into the maritime regulating part of the Coast Guard, not the search and rescue, go fly helicopters. She was crazy smart on the supply chain and the value chain for petroleum. Now, I'm an admiral, she's a commander, so she's probably got 15 years in. I've got 25. She takes me aside, she said, Admiral, you got to quit talking about barges. I'm like, okay, help me out here. She goes, it's an irrelevant metric. She goes, counting how many barges and gallons in the barge is like trying to estimate the population of New York by counting taxi cabs. She goes, the fuel is going to go from one refinery to a storage tank in a barge. Then it's going to go from a storage tank to this place because it has to have the additive because now we're switching to winter fuel. Then it's going to go back into storage. Then it's going over here because it may be stored for then going out on a ship. That 1 gallon of gas has been on multiple barges multiple times. You have to quit talking about barges. This was a perfect truth to power. I'm a jet flyer helicopter guy. I know nothing on how dead dinosaurs become a tank of gas. I don't know, but she does. And she said, I said, okay, now that you've told me I'm saying the wrong thing, what should I talk about? She goes, sir, there are 12 facilities. We've got 150 facilities to regulate. There's 12 that really will make a difference. If we can get the big 12 open, we can make a difference for the region and the nation at whole. I said, okay, so we're going to talk the big 12. And so at the next press conference, when they said, hey, Admiral, how many gallons we have? I said, you know what? I think a better metric is, let me tell you the 12 big facilities that will make a bigger impact that we need to work with the city and the state to get the employees back to work, to get the power restored to those facilities. We're going to waive some of the requirements, because technically they could not operate if their closed circuit TV cameras weren't working. Coast Guard could waive that. Trust me. That's not important now. I will put a live guard out. We'll make sure of that. But it was great truth to power for her to say, you're continuing to embarrass yourself. I'm paraphrasing. And what you're saying is nonsensical to those that know what the hell's going on. You need to talk about something different. And I would hope, whether it's Microsoft or whatever, somebody can come up and say, we started this conversation by saying the wrench turner knows best about the bolt that they're putting the wrench on. The person that really is smart to say, hey, hang on, sir, ma'am, from my foxhole, I think this is probably a better way to view it or a better way to do it, or let's not send all 4 helicopters to the same place. That's a bad paradigm.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And you're smart as that leader to listen to the people that is their expertise. That's what they live, eat, and breathe every day. Like I said, no matter how many years they've been in, that's their, and it's never a bad thing to have somebody inform you on how not to embarrass yourself in front of people that just being honest. That's always a good one to know. Yeah.
So the book I'm going to commend to you is Rookie Smarts by Liz Wiseman, Wisman. And her hypothesis is always be the rookie, always be in your first year, asking questions, discovering new things, trying new things, being eager for knowledge. Because if you become a settler instead of a pioneer, you're not growing anymore, and you're probably not doing your organization what it needs. So I commend that book to you.
No, that's a great one. And it's always looking at it with a fresh set of eyes. How am I looking at it like I'm coming in brand new? I mean, and one of the things is when you do have new people coming in, okay, well, what do you see? Like, what do you see that I'm missing, right? Because we're looking at it every day. I mean, it's hard to proofread your own work, exactly, even if you are trying to look at it with a new set of eyes. But last big question is, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Number one, I would say become a practitioner of leadership. It's interesting that the class I'm doing for VCU, once a week, we only meet once a week, I have a student tell me, what's a good blog, podcast, website, whatever, and tell me why it resonated with you. I mean, there is tons of stuff out there. So you may not agree with it all, but that's okay. The fact that in your own mind you're saying, I agree with that, but I might differ with this, is a good one. The other one is some sort of good 360 eval. As you get more senior, it becomes a more lonely world. And your spouse cannot be the only person that tells you when you're whacked out and saying something silly, because your spouse spends less and less time with you, and your coworkers are going to say, oh gosh, Admiral, have you lost weight? Your hair looks great. That was a great joke. I mean, all that stuff. But yet my wife in the car will say, that speech wasn't your best work, which is a nice way of saying you didn't put your time into it, and you probably could have done better, which is, yeah, you're right there, I did. So some sort of way to get unfettered, honest feedback. Usually it's anonymous. I know within the Coast Guard, every year we have to. It's mandated by law now. Congress said all generals and admirals in the military have to, because of all the toxic leadership that was out there. And then you got to do something with it. But it's interesting. every year I do it, and then I show it to my wife, and over dinner she says, it's exactly what I tell you, but now you just have somebody else telling you, and the Coast Guard paid for somebody to tell you what I tell you anyway. I'm like, yes, dear, you're right. So anyway, so I would say
to her for shopping.
yeah. So you need to have that mirror. You're gonna like some of the things you see. You're not gonna like some of the things that you'd see, and then you got to work on it. But just like I got a feeling if you were a professional basketball player or baseball player, you wouldn't decide I'm so good that I'm going to stop practicing.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a world-class leader, you need to be a practitioner of leadership and never stop learning. I mean, looking at the videos, reading the books. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there, and hone your skills.
Nice. Well, how about you were talking about the class that you're teaching over at VCU? So how about this? Tell us a little bit about that, and tell us about what you're doing status post Coast Guard since you're retired, and a little bit about how listeners can connect with you, your company, visit your website, connect with you on LinkedIn, whoever, whatever. Tell us about all the ways that they can connect with the goodness for Dan Abel.
Yeah. So Virginia Commonwealth University (VCU) has a Master of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness, and I got in contact with them, and they said, right at the point that I was talking with them, which was a year ago, they said, we have nobody teaching leadership, particularly crisis leadership, which they saw as a gap. They said, we've got courses on risk management, we've got courses on ICS organization, we've got all sorts of courses on how you manage a crisis, but nothing on. And so the class really goes with the first third is garden variety leadership,
Right.
Phase 0, this is how you lead Cub Scout den all the way to how you lead, a major wildland firefighting, leadership.
Right.
Then we get into ethical leadership because in crisis or steady state, the leader is faced with some really tough challenges and some different ways and lenses of viewing decisions through ethical lenses. And then the part we're getting into actually tomorrow is the crisis application of, okay, if these are the things that work really well with leadership, when you pressurize it and time is critical, you have scant time to make decisions, you got to move out, you've got people that are strung out and tired, you're exhausted, what changes in that crucible, which is now crisis, and how do you get through it? So that's the course. As far as what I did, looking back, obviously, for good or for bad, I honed a lot of skills on how to respond to large crisis. And so my feeling, the whole, the why is I would love to give to the next generation some of the lessons learned and mistakes I made so that the next time, a ship hits a bridge or a hurricane hits the shore, those leaders that are following behind me maybe have a little, in the back of their head saying, I remember Dan Abel taught me that this is something we ought to think about. And we advance the science of crisis leadership. So the name of my company, it's interesting. The Coast Guard motto is Semper Paratus, which is always prepared. The name of my company is Status Paratus, which is Latin for condition prepared. So my goal is to get you, your company, or you personally ready for the next big one so that your status is prepared for that. So you can, www.statusparatus, you can find me, or just Google Dan Abel, you'll probably find me there. But that's the niche that I'm looking at is not just leadership, but pressurized, time-critical, decision-making under pressure, crisis type stuff.
Nice. Just statusparatus.com.
Yep, that's the one.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't a .net, .org, whatever. There's a whatever is floating around everywhere. So we wanted to make sure.
Well, now that you mention it, let me just double check. I'll grab my business card.
We can put that in the show notes as well.
It is statusparatus.com. So there you go.
Outstanding. Well, like I said, I would say connect with you on LinkedIn. Go there. One thing that you mentioned that I want to do kind of last follow up with, and I remember you talking about your company. You were mentioning before about what asking somebody the question of what happens when the big accident hits, the big tragedy hits, the big whatever hits, and all of a sudden now you've got CNN, NBC, everybody with a camera and a microphone in your face saying, what about, what about, what about, what about? And people basically going down to the level of their training. So to give us a, 30-second synopsis of that kind of the why behind why they should call you, because when that kind of stuff happens, you're like, oh my God. And if you're not prepared, then you're screwed, pretty much.
So I mentioned the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, that Harvard course.
Right.
They talk it's called Going to the Basement, which physiologically, the front part of your brain is a laboratory where this is novel, this is interesting, let me think about this. That part of your brain does not work when you're threatened. I mean, it's primal. The middle part of your brain is motor sensory, some of the stuff, the muscle memory you could do. And then the base of your brain, which is where you go, is I'm breathing, I'm blinking, and maybe I'm sniffling, and that's it. Yeah. It is natural that you're going to go back to the basement. The only way that you come out of the basement is by practice and muscle memory. This is why, as a Coast Guard helicopter pilot, we always were doing practice emergency procedures. They would put me in the simulator, give me engine fires, give me engine failures, so that for those first couple seconds where I am like, holy crap, I'm looking at these instruments I cannot believe, I'm already moving because the muscle memory is there. I've seen it before. I know what I should do. And eventually the brain catches up with the muscle memory and the motor skills and things you should be doing. The only way you're going to get yourself out of that really bad day when the cell phone hits and the microphone comes in front of your face is the fact you've thought about it, you've got some draft standard operating procedures of how you're going to react, and you've practiced. If you can get that down, it's still going to be ugly, but it's going to be a lot better than gosh, I guess we've never thought about what happens if we've really had a bad day for this organization.
Nice. No, definitely. I wanted people to be able to connect the kind of abstract for a lot of people to, crisis leadership, this, that, and the other, to an actual, oh my God, this just happened with our organization. I open up my office door or I walk in and all of a sudden the lobby's full of cameras and microphones. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I mean, you can't ask for a better reason to pick up the phone, go on the website, give you guys a call to say, hey, can you come in and get our guys to where if they go to the basement, at least there's going to be something there, not just cobwebs and and spider mite.
Yeah, and Dave, I would say you're right. To the outside customers, it doesn't look good to just stand there and blank-faced, not knowing what to say. But even worse, you get called in, you're looking around the conference table, there's all your senior reports. They're looking at you because you're the leader. And they're wondering, what do we do next? You're in charge. And that's where you can't lock up. You got to have something that you're ready to do. And you're going to say, okay, these are the 3 or 4 things we're going to work on. We've practiced this before. We're going to do this. And then 2 hours from now, we're going to have that crisis leader meeting that we talked about in practice. And then I'm going to call the stakeholders. And then we're going to have a press conference at 2. And you start rolling out some of the things you've pre-scripted. Because guess what? The plan may not provide, survive first contact with the enemy, but at least it's a plan that you can say we're going to move the 10 o'clock meeting to 8 o'clock, and we're going to move this over here. Let's move out.
Nice. Well, I would recommend everybody check out, like I said, connect with Dan on LinkedIn, go to statusbrightest.com. And with that, appreciate you being here today, Dan. And that is it for this episode of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We will see you next time. Take care.
So long, guys.